Srila Prabhupada ki jai. We celebrated Prabhupada's arrival yesterday in America. What a story. Just an amazing story. Completely transcendental, like right out of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Excuse me, it's too late here. And I don't know if you know this, but right at the time that Prabhupada came, the immigration laws changed. Prior to that, it was very difficult for Indians to come to America. Did you know that? The immigration laws changed. Hold on. I was just listening to Srila Prabhu's talk this morning, and the Catholic Church became much more liberal and more open to other religions at that time. And of course, the younger generation was revolting, and so it was just it's an amazing story. It's just like fiction, but it's true. It's transcendental. That's the nature of the transcendental Leela, and everything that Prabhupada did was predicted. It was going to, the Shastra talks about it. This is going to happen. And it happened, didn't it? Hare Krishna. Yeah, so the Shastra said someone's going to do it. And you know who did it. And there are many. Anyway, today was a great day. I'd given a class. If you didn't hear it, Radhapriya will put it up online. And I was emphasizing in that class how important it is to understand Prabhupada objectively, not through our own, not the way we want to understand him, but the way he wants us to understand him. And it's been pointed out by scholars that there's a tendency for the followers of a charismatic leader after he goes to become more fanatical than he was, to become more black and white, more strict, more everything than he was. And so they don't represent him properly. It's interesting, isn't it? So just be careful of that tendency. So today we're going to continue reading from where we left off yesterday. And we were reading the statements that Prabhupada made about going back home, back to Godhead. And before we read, we should chant a little bit, right? Give time for everyone to come, and we can follow in Prabhupada's footsteps and chant Jai Radha Madhava. And I will set my keyboard up. And I have to put on my headphones to know how this is going to sound. Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Radha Madhava. Okay, sounds good to me. It's okay for you? Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dhari Jashwara Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Sadanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Shodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Shodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Sodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Shodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Shodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Shodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Sri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. Go Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol. Okay. Okay. Yes. No buzzing. Last time we had buzzing. I fixed the buzzing. Okay, Hare Krishna. Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murari He Natta Narayana Vasudeva Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murari He Natta Narayana Vasudeva. Thank you. Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murari He Natta Narayana Vasudeva. So it looks like yesterday we only read one quote. So I will begin. I don't know if anyone is here putting the quotes up. I'd sent them to Kamaniya and Anuradha and Yana. If none of them are here, I could send them to one of you to put up, if you'd like. Or one of you could look this up. This is a letter, April 4th, 1971. It's written to Saradiya and Vaikuntanath. This is not a probiotic drink, so don't worry. It's lemon, water, and cherry syrup, and maple syrup. Simply use this merit. Oh, so this is entitled I gave this the title. So this is, it's the letter to Vaikuntanath and Saradiya, April 4th, 1971. By the time you find it, I'll have read it. So, if I have your email handy, I'll send it to you. Your email doesn't come up as Kamalak. She. S-H-I. Doesn't come up. What's your email? Kamalakshi, I know I have your email, but it must be under another name. If you give it to me, I will send it to you. Oh, Yana put it up. Okay. We've got them up. Got them both up. Okay. All right. No worries. Simply use this marital life for spreading the glories of Lord Krishna. And in this very lifetime, you will be promoted to associate with Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. Now, find we have discussed the many times that Srila Prabhupada has said, do this and you go back to Godhead, and do that and you go back to Godhead. And if you've been listening to me or you're familiar with these quotes, it's not like Prabhupada saying, if you do this and that, which are basically simple things like preaching and following the principles, chanting your rounds, following his orders, giving your life to Krishna. Well, by what I mean by simple, not like complicated esoteric practices or esoteric understandings of Shastra. He says if you do this, you'll go back to Godhead. He doesn't say if you do this and in addition, X, Y, Z, or as we say in America, X, Y, Z. He doesn't say that. And you have to understand this, and you have to have this esoteric practice, and you have to read these esoteric books. He doesn't say that, which is interesting because some devotees do say that. No, you have to do this and do that and do this and do that. And according to Shastra, they're correct. But according to here, there are many things that Prabhupada says, he's not adding all of that. He's saying, give your life to Krishna. It's a package. You'll be taken care of. You'll go back to Godhead. That's what we're getting over and over and over again. And in every single one of those that we've read, we've never seen Prabhupada say anything beyond these things. Follow the principles, follow my instructions, give your life to Krishna, give your life to spreading Krishna consciousness. You'll go back to Godhead. That's always what he says. So I think that's just something to note, that it's like we've said before, Prabhupada is kind of like making a contract. You do this and I'll get you in. Basically, it's like what he's saying. You just follow me. I know how to get there. And don't worry, when you get to the door, you just tell them I'm with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and they'll let you in. How did you get here? Well, I just did what A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada told me to do. And so... Okay, let's continue reading. Well, I'm going to read that again, just because maybe it'll have more impact now that I explain that. Simply use this marital life for spreading the glories of Lord Krishna, and in this very lifetime, you will be promoted to associate with Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. In other words, don't use your married life for enjoying life, but use it for spreading Krishna consciousness. Use your married life. Use everything in the service of Krishna, and you'll be promoted back to Godhead. So please stay on the purity platform. Chant 16 rounds daily and without fail. Follow all the regulative principles, or as they say in South Africa, regulated principles. Regulative principles. And read all our books, and your life is sure to be successful. Unless one is sufficiently empowered, one cannot preach Krishna consciousness. So the fact that you are preaching so nicely is proof that you are already benedicted by Krishna. So preach Krishna consciousness and be happy. This is interesting. This is like, what's the formula for being happy in household life? Preach Krishna consciousness together. There's another point that Prabhupada's making, which is made in many places in Prabhupada's books. He's saying, follow the principles, and then he's saying, he says, follow the principles, your life will be successful. And then that you're having success in preaching indicates that you're actually following, because unless you were following, you wouldn't be successful, because success in preaching is not dependent on material ability. Material ability. Is that what I said? It's not dependent on material ability. It's dependent on empowerment, which you get from following the principles, and then you get spiritual power. And so it's interesting the way Prabhupada's saying it. He said, follow these principles, you'll become successful, and the fact that your preaching is successful indicates to me that you are following the principles, and that's why you are successful. So then continue like this. Krishna will bless you, and you'll be happy, and you go back to Godhead. It all sounds very simple, because it is simple. The only thing that's not simple is we have a hard time. Sometimes we have a hard time doing it, but if we actually do it, it's simple. Does that make sense? We have a hard time doing it, but if we do it, it's actually simple. Well, what I meant to say was, as Prabhupada many times said, it's not difficult, it's just we make it difficult. I think that's the point. That's what I was trying to say. I'm still waking up, even though I woke up like 5 hours ago, 4 hours ago. I'm still waking up. It's one of those days, right? So, I don't know, I think we're all still waking up, isn't it? Every day we're waking up a little more. So Prabhupada, many times we think, oh, this is so hard, it's so complicated, how can I understand it? And Prabhupada's saying, it's simple. So that was what I thought I said. If I didn't, what I was trying to say was, it's actually very simple, what Prabhupada's saying. But then sometimes we complicate it because we think it's not simple, when in fact it is simple. So think about that. You know, if you think it's difficult or difficult to understand, or the process is complicated or confusing, this and that, it may be due to the fact that you're complicating it, and it's much simpler than you think, or you're, like sometimes something's simple, but you're trying to understand it like very deeply, and you don't need to, because the understanding is simple, it's on the surface, and you're going deeper. But does this mean that, and this mean that? And 3 hours later, oh, no conclusion, and it was time for lunch. So something that's not the way Prabhupada wanted us to approach Krishna consciousness. Okay. The next letter is entitled, Be Fully Engaged and You Go Back to Godhead. This is a letter to a devotee named Kirtika. This is a lady. And this is written on May 21st, 1971. And she was at that time, the wife of Gunagrai, who later took sannyas, Gunagrai Maharaj, our wonderful godbrother. And they were in charge of a temple in Buffalo at that time, I believe. So that is perfection in Krishna consciousness. To be so much engaged in Krishna's loving service that you cannot bear separation from that service, not even for a moment. Beautiful thought. So somehow or other, always be engaged. And if there is nothing else, in other words, if you have nothing to do, you can sit down and chant. Hare Krishna as much as possible. 16 rounds daily is the minimal requirement. But you should chant Hare Krishna as much as possible. And follow all the regulative principles strictly. Read all our books, attend classes, and go for street sankirtan. In this way, be engaged in Krishna's business 24 hours a day, and you will be happy. And in the end, you will go back home, back to Godhead. So There's a theme. I think you see the theme. There's a theme coming out here. And the theme is, be engaged in Krishna's service. Always give your life to Krishna. Give everything to Krishna. And you go back to Godhead. Nothing but Krishna in your life. I just want to... I think it's the time of year where the sun now is rising right there. And we didn't get this bright sunlight before. So I just have to turn it down a bit. Yeah, so it's two ways of looking at this statement. One way of looking at this statement is if I give my life to Krishna and I engage in service 24/7, then I would become completely Krishna conscious in this life. The other way of looking at it is, if I give my life 24/7 to Krishna consciousness, it must mean I already am Krishna conscious. Otherwise, how could I give my life? Another way, well, there's actually a third way of looking at it, is that if I give my life to Krishna, even though I'm lacking in some way, but because I've dedicated everything, then Krishna will make up the difference. And he could, you might say, well, I don't feel that I'm that Krishna conscious. And if I were to die today, I don't feel that I'm free from material desire, and would go back to Krishna. But there's two ways to look at that. One way is, as I said, as Krishna says in the 9th chapter of the Gita, I will make up what you lack, I'll give you. So that's one way of understanding it, that maybe there's a lacking, but in the last days, weeks, months of your life, Krishna can make up for whatever you lack and just give it to you in order to prepare you to go back to Godhead. That's highly possible. And a lot of the way Prabhupada explained this, going back to Godhead, was interesting. It was in the frame of, well, do this and you'll go back to Godhead. And it's almost like, pass this exam and you graduate. It was something like that, like interesting, like, open this temple or preach in this way and you'll go back to Godhead. Krishna will take you. The Acharya, the mood was that you'll please the Acharyas so much. They'll take you back to Godhead. So we're seeing that theme here. Give your life to Krishna, you'll be Krishna conscious at the end. And if you think you won't be, give your life to Krishna, and all the Acharyas will take you back to Godhead. Give your life to Krishna. Krishna will make you ready. But there's one thing that would be helpful to clarify. It seems a contradiction. If you've read everything Prabhupada has said about this, it seems that there's one contradiction, and the contradiction is, and we read this before, to go back to Godhead, you can't have any material desires. And so, when we hear that, then we think, well, there's no way that I'll be going back to Godhead in this lifetime, because I'm attached to so many stupid little things. I need my comfortable slippers, and I need my little sweet after lunch, and I need this blanket and this pillow, and I need, and I'm attached to the chair, the sofa I sit on when I change. We look at, but that's not actually what Prabhupada's talking about, because those things are not the real obstacles to spiritual life. Your slippers and your sofa, they're not really you can't really become that attached to slippers and a sofa, believe me. Not attached enough that would, I can't leave the world because I'm attached to my sofa. I doubt that's going to happen. So what do you see from these letters? You see that Prabhupada is glorifying the fact that they've dedicated their lives to spreading Krishna consciousness. And we have to assume that Prabhupada knows that they're young devotees, and young devotees, they're not pure. They're attached to things of this world. But the point that Prabhupada's making is that you're dedicating your life to Krishna's service. And that overrides. Is it raining? The sun's out. Auspicious. Your dedication to Krishna's service, it overrides these other things. In other words, these other things, they're not really significant, they're not important, they're not things to worry about. So a devotee, so many devotees will say, yeah, but I'm so attached to this. I still think I'm my body. If I don't get the right prasadam, I end up beating up somebody, and I can't do this, and I have to have this facility. That's kind of just normal. It's not exactly what we mean by material desires. We mean fundamental desire to enjoy, to imitate Krishna, to control like Krishna, and so forth. So that's why Prabhupada can say this, that if you give your life to Krishna, you'll go back to Godhead, even though we think, well, how could I go back to Godhead with all these desires? Because the fact is, those desires are not the predominant desires. The predominant desire is that we want to make the world Krishna conscious. And so Prabhupada always encouraged us, think about how to give Krishna consciousness to others. And so that's what we did. And so when he saw us doing that, he would say, oh, you're pure devotees. You're engaged fully, you're thinking of Krishna always, and we're thinking, I'm not thinking of Krishna always. But the fact of the matter is that very devotee who says, I'm not thinking of Krishna always, is always thinking how to spread Krishna consciousness, or always doing something related to spreading Krishna consciousness with every waking hour of their day. And you might say, yeah, but they're working a job. But they're working a job to maintain themselves so that when they get home, they can again engage directly in Krishna consciousness. So give yourself some slack, give yourself a break, you're not that bad. And if we follow the strain of thought of Prabhupada, we can see that this is what he's saying. Otherwise, this is 1971. These devotees, I think, maybe they joined in 68 or 69. But the fact is that any letter that Prabhupada's writing, the oldest devotee at that point could have only been about 8 years in the movement. And the majority, and that's if the letter was written in 77 to the first devotees. So we just assume, you can safely assume that the letters Prabhupada's writing are written to very new devotees. These are 2-3-year-old devotees. And he's telling them, you're fully engaged in Krishna consciousness, you'll go back to Godhead. You're empowered. Interesting, isn't it? What does Prabhupada mean? He said, well, I've given you instructions. You're following the instructions. You're giving your life to those instructions. So you're good. You're a pure devotee. Amazing, right? So give yourself some credit. And I think it's also important when we reflect on our position to not reflect on it in a way that Prabhupada didn't see us, or in a way that Prabhupada didn't describe us. Yes, we want to be humble, but I think sometimes if we denigrate ourselves too much, we can just become discouraged. And Prabhupada is encouraging us here, saying, well, you'll go back to Godhead, you're dedicated your life to Krishna. We don't think we're dedicated, but practically speaking, these devotees were preaching. They went to Trinidad to open up Krishna consciousness, so all they were doing was preaching. And by that action, you get Krishna's attention to the degree that Krishna says, you're in. You're my man, you're my woman, your place is secure in the spiritual world. That's basically how Prabhupada has explained it. So we have a question from Ajayani Tai, the incarnation of questions. Ajayani, Krishna Karshani, Ajayani Tai is competing with you for questions. He may ask more questions than you do, but both of you ask really nice questions that creates more discussion. How will we know that we are ready to go back to Godhead? They're never ready. But Jayanitai, one way of answering this question, which may be the best way, and someone might say maybe the only way, is just worry about following Prabhupada and your spiritual master, and don't worry about going back to Godhead, and you'll be ready to go back to Godhead by not worrying about it, and only worrying about executing the order of your spiritual master. So that's one answer, which follows in line with yesterday's discussion of don't try to make spiritual advancement, just try to please your spiritual master. But another instruction which Prabhupada gave is about monitoring your level of detachment. Because if we are too attached to the body, to our relatives, to our place of birth, etc., then we're not qualified to go back to Godhead. And so Prabhupada said, he didn't use the word monitor, but basically he was saying like that. You have to monitor your attachments so you don't become so attached that your consciousness is focused on your family and things of this world. So, Jayanitai, I have a question for you. If you knew you had 5 minutes to live, what would you do? You'd probably say, I would just chant Hare Krishna. I'd say, what would you think about? And you'd say, I would just think about Krishna. I go, okay, then I think you're ready to go back to Godhead. If you would have said, if I know I had 5 minutes to live, and you said, I would totally freak out, I wouldn't be ready to go, I don't want to leave my mother alone, I'm taking care of her, then you're not ready to go back to Godhead. So you imagine, if you were given 5-minute warning, what would you do? What would you be thinking of? And then you can understand where your attachments are. And so, do book distribution, okay. You're attached to it, but you would do devotional service. So I hope when you fall down dead, the guy who you were giving the book to doesn't get arrested for killing you. So that's how you know where your attachments lie. You ask yourself, if you had 5 minutes to live or a moment to live, what would you do? Aside from what would you do, where would your consciousness be? What would you be thinking of? Where would it go? Oh, I can't leave my sons and daughters, they're so young. How will my wife live without me? Who's going to cook for my husband? All these things. Oh, I was supposed to next week go here, now I can't go. And we're going to Disneyland next week, now I can't go. And you die thinking of Disneyland, you become Donald Duck in your next life. Yeah. So that's how or Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse. Either you wanted to go to Disneyland and you died, so your next life, either you become Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. I grew up meditating on Mickey Mouse. I had a television show. It was a Walt Disney show. I think the show was called Mickey Mouse. So we grew up meditating on Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. How unfortunate. What an unfortunate birth. So anyway, I think it's a good question to ask yourself. Where would if I knew I was going to die, where would my consciousness go? Okay. So Ankush is, when the doctor says you're going to die, he immediately runs out, gets his book bag, and hits the streets, and dies on the battlefield. A glorious death. Anandita is asking or telling us something. Can you explain how attachment to our place of birth is an impediment? Well, if you're born in the Holy Dham, that would be good. I feel attached to my home because it is near the temple, but also other factors, community, friendship. Well, is this still attachment? We're not against attachment. we're against attachment to things that interfere with bhakti. You know, the Shastra says you have the consciousness of a cow or an ass if you think the place of your birth is worshipable. But if you're born in Vrindavan, it's true, your place of birth is worshipable. But it's said in the context that, you know, you think you're so great that the place you're born is like special because you were born there. Vrindavan is not special because you were born there. Vrindavan is special because Krishna was born there. So, you know, you can't just take it at face value. You have to understand the meaning. So if the place I was born is near the temple, the devotees are there, my friends who are devotees are there, what does the Bhagavatam say? Bhagavatam says you should become attached to devotees. So we're not against attachment. We're against material attachment. We're not against attachment. We're against attachment to things that are going to cause us to come back and take birth again. We're against attachment to things that's going to cause us to forget Krishna. That's what we're attached to. That's what is meant here. Otherwise, attachment is normal. It's normal to have attachment, right? How can you live without attachment? You try to be a Mayavadi, impersonalist, and develop a stone heart. I'm not attached to anything. It's just, you don't want to be attached to things that would cause you to want to take birth again or to forget Krishna. So don't worry about attachment. Worry about attachment to things that are antagonistic to bhakti. So I don't know who your community, friendship, etc. is, but if they're all devotees, then you should be attached to that. That's fine. But there's an interesting point, and we've discussed this before, but I think it's relevant, and we should discuss again. Queen Kunti is praying not to be attached to her sons. And at first sight or first observation, one would say that doesn't make sense because her sons are devotees. And Shastra says you should be attached to devotees. And, you know, if your sons, your husbands, your family are all devotees, and you're praying to Krishna, I don't want to be attached, it seems to go against the verse in Bhagavatam spoken earlier by Kapila Dev, that attachment to devotees is perfection of attachment. And so when you understand the situation of Kunti and what she's actually saying, she's saying, I don't want to be materially attached. You know, thinking this is my son and I have the consciousness or the attachment of an ordinary woman in relation to my sons, I don't want that material attachment. So, it's possible you can be materially attached to spiritual things, which means attached to enjoying them. So I don't want to be attached to enjoying my sons. That's what she's saying. But attached to them as devotees and serving them, yeah, that's good. That's what will liberate you. Like you wouldn't say, no one would say you shouldn't be attached to your guru, right? So, attachment to the lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. But you could be materially attached to your guru, expecting things from him, material things. And so you'd have a material attachment, and that would not be good, right? Sometimes a devotee may expect something from their spiritual master, which is not within the job description of the spiritual master to give, something material. Like, develop some kind of relationship, like I expect him to be like my birth father, or I expect him to encourage me in these ways in my material life, and he doesn't, so I don't like that he doesn't do that. No, that's becoming material. Okay. Anandita, where were you born? I don't know. If I were born in a city in India, I don't know how I would ever become attached to it. I was born in LA. I made a vow never to live there again. It's such a horrible, crowded, smoggy, foggy, on fire now place. Of course, for preaching, we'll live anywhere. But for personal taste, if we don't have to live somewhere, then, if we don't have to live in a hellish city, why would you want to? Christe said, this sounded too easy to my complicated brain. I would have said, chant and think of Krishna, but in daily life I still have so many attachments. Realized some new ones. Yeah, it's a good exercise to think. If I knew I was going to die, what would I be thinking of? And I think, Christe, in all of us, we should probably practice. Okay, when the doctor tells me you have a week to live, we should practice now how we're going to act when he tells us that. And you're hopefully going to detach from everything and focus on Krishna. I hope. I would expect you to. I would pray that you do. Krishna Krsna says, I saw many devotees who gave their lives to Krishna, and after some time they left Krishna consciousness being discouraged. It seems they were not ready for that. It seems they were not ready for that. How to know what point we can give our lives to Krishna? At what point we can give our lives to Krishna to not leave discouraged and do a stable advancement and be a devotee a whole life? Well, I think the problem with that question is there are devotees who didn't leave, who may have experienced the same challenges as the devotees you're describing, or and so there's also the discussion would be not only did they give too much too fast, but maybe they didn't, but maybe they had expectations that weren't met. Maybe they had made offenses. Maybe they lost their sense of bhakti, got into a bad association. Their spiritual master had left. They developed a bad relation with their spiritual master. There could be so many ways to answer the question depending on the individual. And then, we'd have to know, well, why did someone who was in the same situation like yourself, you're still here, you didn't leave? And a lot of the devotees you knew when you were younger have left. And in your estimation, they gave too much too fast. One of the things we see, I'm sure you've seen this, Krishna Karshini, that if someone's giving too much too fast and you sense that I think you're going to burn yourself out and you won't be able to maintain this, it's hard for them to understand it. And so there is the question that, let's say 20 years ago you told those devotees, I think you're trying to surrender beyond your capacity, and I think you're going to burn out, and I think you'll probably leave Krishna consciousness. What do you think they would have said? They would have said, Krishna Karshini, you're crazy, isn't it? So I think there may be problems for those devotees which were created by the people who were guiding them, who maybe were pushing them too hard and weren't perhaps taking care of their spiritual lives as well as they should have been. But I've also seen, and I'm sure you've seen also, that sometimes it's the devotee themselves who's pushing themselves even beyond the call of duty, even beyond what they're being asked to do. And so sometimes it's their nature, to go for it. Whatever I do it fully. And so it might have been their nature just to give themselves. And it might have been the environment of ISKCON to give, the Guru's preaching, just surrender, give yourself. And it would really be hard to understand that you could do anything else other than fully surrender. So to we kind of amalgamate all these points into an answer. We need guidance from senior mature devotees who can help us understand what we need to do that would be sustainable. And I think a lot of what we did, as you point out, it wasn't sustainable, but there was nobody around telling us. And we had no way of knowing, because now in ISKCON you have older devotees who can say, well, I did that and this was what happened, he did that and this is what happened. So if you do that, the same thing's going to happen to you. So we suggest you do it this way and this will be sustainable. We didn't have that as young devotees. So if a devotee is on the path to burning out, it could be that they just lack guidance from more mature, seasoned devotees who could balance things. So when the Western brahmachari says, yeah, I'm gonna be a brahmachari my whole life, I'd tell him, you have any other jokes you want to tell me? That's like, how many Western men remain brahmacharis? I know 2. Out of 5,000 Prabhupada disciples, I know 2. I was probably 3 or 4. And a few sannyasis. So, the odds are against you. But ask the brahmacharis from 20, who are all now married. Prabhu, did you think you're ever going to get married? No way, never thought I would get married. That was like, that was like the end of your spiritual life if you get married. That was not our thought. We were just going to distribute books our entire life. That's pretty common. But nowadays in ISKCON, you'll see less people will think that way because there's more mature devotees around giving them guidance. No, be practical. A few years, you probably want to go back to college because you'll need to be married and you'll need to support yourself, or you need to at least plan a future for yourself, how you'll maintain yourself because you're going to want to get married. No, I don't want to get married. I just want to be brahmachari. Yeah, right. Just take my word for it. I'm not saying there aren't men who can become brahmacharis for life and take sannyas. Of course there are. But generally, the man who thinks he can do it is not the one. There's a few that everybody knows they can do it. You just see them. But most Western men can't. So I think that's really the cause of the problem. They didn't get guidance. You agree with that analysis? Ankush is asking or saying, Yudhishthira Maharaj was attached to his dog when asked to go back to Godhead. What do we learn as devotees from the story? I don't know that story, but if it's true, what do we learn? Be careful. Thing is, you can become, well, we learn from the story of Bharat Maharaj that if you're not careful, you can become attached to things maybe you think you would never become attached to. I mean, we tell the brahmacharis that you should not associate, if you want to remain brahmachari, you should not, whoops, I lost you.